Begin our class here. If you will, go ahead and open your psalm book to number 36, Amazing Grace. I lost Eddie. Oh, there he is. All right. I thought, wow, hopefully I didn't lose him here. Brother Tommy's going to lead us in number 36, and after that, Eddie will lead us in our prayer.
Almighty and loving Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this another Lord's Day. Father, we're thankful you have blessed us with health that we're able to assemble together to worship you this day. Father, as we are about to enter into our Bible classes, we pray that thou will be with our teachers this morning, that they will be able to remember the things they have prepared to teach us, and that we'll listen and learn from our lessons today. Father, pray that they'll be with us always. Help us to return at the next appointed time. Give us a safe journey home. This way, in Christ's name, amen.
Amen. We'll go ahead and open your Bibles now to Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 29. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 29. For those of you who were sitting and you didn't go look and see what the weather looks like, right now it's still raining, so make you feel a little more comfortable. I know sometimes you're thinking, am I going to make it home? Am I going to make it home safely? Right now it's still raining, so you ought to be able to do fine going home. So, Lord willing, that's what we're going to all make it home safely this afternoon. Let's begin now with verse 29, the last verse of chapter 19, as we look at what Solomon has to say. Judgments are prepared for scoffers, and beatings for the back of fools. Now, as you look at this, one of the things that you will notice is you have the word judgments and you have the word beatings. Now, you have the parallel words scoffers and fools. Now, when you think about judgment and beatings, what does that bring to your mind? Okay, well, discipline's what I bring to mind. Scourging of Jesus was something he didn't deserve, but judgment for scoffers. Scoffer is a person who is a foolish person, who mocks, who makes fun of and belittles, and people who think they already are more intelligent than everyone else. And so he says judgments are prepared for them. They do not understand what it is they're doing, and so you have to discipline them. But then he used the word beatings for the back of fools, and you can't say things. Well, I don't say you can't say them. You're not supposed to say things that was said when I was a kid. For instance, we'll say, we're going to beat some sense into you. And I really think that that's the idea behind this verse. Some people, that's the only way they learn. Let me offer you a few passages which I think are helpful here. If you go to chapter 10 and verse 13, he says, wisdom is found on the lips of him who has understanding, but the rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. In other words, God intended that those people suffer the consequences of it. And then you can go to chapter 17 and verse 10. Rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows for a fool. And then in chapter 26 and verse 3, he said, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. And what Solomon is trying to indicate is that there are some people that have to learn the hard way. Any of y'all ever learn things the hard way? I think about school. I remember being in the first grade class of Mrs. Jones. She told us when we were little kids in that class, you must put your head on your desk during rest period. And I don't want to see your head raised. Guess what little boys tried to do? Raise her head. And she had one of those little, you had the little rubber ball with the rubber band attached to it with a little paddle, That's what she paddled us with. And I remember the first grade getting a paddling for raising my head. And what I thought was terrible was there was always one student chosen to be the monitor. And, I never got chosen to be the monitor. I was going to say I would have been perfect for the job, but sometimes you have to learn the hard way. Some lessons are learned the hard way. And Solomon is trying to impress upon us that some people have to do that. Some people have to learn the hard way repeatedly. You go through it over and over and over again because you did not learn the first time. After a few times, guess what happens that you learn? You lay your head down on the table and you don't pick it up during rest period. And then next thing you know, you fell asleep during class. And so, but that was what they wanted us to sleep during the first grade. But okay, let's go to chapter 20, verse 1. There's some really powerful proverbs here in the beginning of chapter 20. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Now, he's using two different words for intoxicating drink. Do you know the difference between them? Anybody? Okay, well, in this case, it's not necessarily the alcohol content, but the source from which it's derived. Wine comes as a vintage. This comes from grain. And that's the reason why some modern translations will actually use the word beer here for that. And so that's a distinction here. But he says wine is a mocker and strong drink is a brawler. Now, explain to me how wine can be a mocker. Okay, well, slips up on you. It makes fun of you. How many of you have ever seen the picture of a drunk person? The television commercials want to show you a person just having a lot of fun. That's not reality. You know what reality is? Throwing up, falling down. Yeah. They want to make a fool out of you. I mean, a person who gets intoxicated thinks they look one way, when in reality they look like a fool. I mean, I've seen a lot of intoxicated people. They walk around, they stagger, they bump into things, they say stupid stuff. They are just, it mocks you, it makes fun of you. But then he says it's also a brawler. Do you know what a brawler is? Somebody ready to fight. You've heard of barroom brawls. Well, I guess where that happens at. In the bar. Yeah, with a strong drink. Have any of you ever noticed all of the Nashville news when they're repeating where people had their conflicts and stuff? Where's it at? It's always 2 o'clock in the morning at a bar. And I'm thinking, If you didn't go to the bar at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to worry about all that. Yeah, you pretty well know what's going to happen when a person does that. Wine is a mocker, and strong drink a broiler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. There's no way that you can make me believe that someone who engages in recreational consumption of alcohol is anything other than a stupid person. And, I know that in our society today, they want to make it look appetizing, especially McMinnville. I'm just astounded by the number of Christians supposedly in Warren County and how much people just act as if this is a cool thing. Yeah, but it's just absolutely absurd. Well, let me offer you some other passages which I think are really helpful here, because Solomon's going to address it again in chapter 23 in verses 29 through verse 35. And here's what he says. Who has woe? Who has complaints? Who has contentions? Or who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things. Your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies at the top of the mast, saying, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When shall I wake that I shall seek another drink? I'm not going to go into great detail about that, because when we get to chapter 23, I will try to break this down. But his first questions are rhetorical questions. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Well, it's obviously a person who's done something that has put him in that position. But then you will notice he talks about specifically verse 31, because the word wine does not necessarily indicate that it's alcoholic. The word wine is much like our English words, or current modern word of grape juice. Can grape juice be fresh, off of the vine, freshly squeezed? Yeah. And it can also be what? How many of you ever put grape juice in the refrigerator and then let it sit there for a while, and you pulled it out and you opened it up? It will ferment. And which is a process, it's a natural process. But what it does, it has an alcoholic content that starts influencing the various senses that a person has. Well, the word that he's talking about, wine, here in chapter 23, he says, when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, indicating what it's going through, that process that it's going through, the fermentation process. And he says what it does, it bites like a serpent, it stings like an adder, serpent, a viper. And he says, then your eyes will see strange things, your heart will utter perverse things. It'll affect how you talk, it'll affect how you walk. And then I think the word, verse 34, when he talks about being like on the top of the mast, swaying from one side to the other. And then verse 35, they struck me and I was not hurt. They beat me, I did not feel it. I am astounded how many times a person who's intoxicated has a terrible car wreck, totals a car, the roof's caved in, and they walk away. And I didn't feel it, didn't know what was going on. And then the addictive part of it, when shall I awake that I may seek another drink? It just goes along with it. I have never seen a nice drunk. I'm sorry, we had a man that worked for us on our car lot, was a mechanic. When he was sober, he was the kindest, nicest man that you'd ever want to meet. And when he was intoxicated, he is the worst fellow in the world. Just awful. And I have absolutely no use for being around alcohol. I don't want to be around a person drinking it. I don't want to see it. And, it's something that Christians ought to avoid at all cost. Okay, let's go to verse 2. The wrath of the king is like the roaring of a lion. Whoever provokes him to anger sins against his own life. Now, verse 1 talks about the lack of self-control with regards to drinking. And in this case, he's talking about provoking a king. What would cause a person to provoke a king? Okay, your big mouth get you in trouble, wouldn't it not? Here's the policeman. He pulls you over, and you got two choices. You can say, yes, sir. Was there a problem? Did I have some sort of a difficulty? Or you can do what? What are you talking about? Why are you stopping me? What's likely to happen if you talk back to a law officer? Bruce, you know that answer. You just make things worse for yourself. The wrath of the king is like a roaring of a lion. And you make him angry, and he's going to bite you. But now if a lion bites you, it's not like your little pet dog biting you. It's going to be a deadly bite. Whoever provokes him to anger sins against. He's talking about provoking someone. Now, there is being unwise with regards to alcohol, but there's also being unwise with regards to your tongue. And some people have not yet understood the seriousness of how they would treat someone who is in a position of authority. And I'd say the same thing is true, not just in regards to the law officer, but does it do a good job talk back to your teacher? No, it doesn't. Those of you who are teaching, you know it doesn't do any good. Well, let me offer some observations here. When you think about a king and his anger, if you go to Daniel chapter 3, you have Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, and there has been the sound played, the trumpet, the flute, the harp, and when that played, everybody was supposed to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's great image. Those three boys didn't bow down. And they were given an opportunity to, correct the situation. They were not disrespectful to Nebuchadnezzar. They said, we're not going to bow down. And, that made him incredibly angry. How angry did he get? 7 times harder. What about the guys who throw them in there? They burned up. He's so angry, we're going to make this so hot, we're even going to end up killing the people who are the guards, who throw them in there. Or think about Herod, Matthew chapter 2 and verse 16. Do you remember when Herod found out that he had been deceived by the wise men? And what did he do? All the little boys, 2 years old and under. When a king gets angry, can he exert a tremendous amount of wrath? He certainly can. Let me offer you some parallel passages here in this I think are helpful. In chapter 16 and verse 14, as messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. You make a king angry and you're just asking for death, and a wise man will appease it. In chapter 28 and verse 15, let's see if I can do that right. 28:15, like a roaring lion and a charging bear is a wicked ruler over poor people. You know, he can really, he uses the lion and the bear, both are there. So I actually go back to verse 2. So the idea of a person who provokes him to anger sins against his own life. He's actually making his life worse. Now, let's go to verse 3. Yes, I got verse 3 on there. Verse 3 says, "It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel." The third thing, he's talking about, alcohol, about provoking someone in a position of authority to anger. But now he's talking about stopping strife. What's the best way to resolve a conflict? Okay? Don't start it, to prevent it. In other words, if you can prevent a problem, that's the best way to deal with it. And most people want to try to find some way to resolve it after it started. But he says it's honorable for a man to stop striving. If you continue to push it, it's only going to get worse. And then he adds the phrase, "since any fool can start a quarrel." And that definitely is true. Now, these verses were supposed to be from the previous one, but let me offer a couple. Chapter 17 and verse 14. He says, "The wise man, or the beginning of strife is like the releasing of water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts." It's like releasing of water. You can't stop it. And then in chapter 19 and verse 11, he says, "The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression." What does it take more stamina to do? Let loose of your temper, or to hold back your temper? Hold it back. Someone says something mean and harsh to you. What is more difficult, to tell him off or to just don't say anything? To keep quiet. So it's not a sign of weakness that you don't respond. It's a sign of strength. And he says any fool can start a quarrel, but he says it's honorable. It's a good thing for a man to stop striving. And if we could just only learn that in life, just don't argue with people and don't let them have that opportunity. Now let's go to verse 4. This is interesting. "The lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing." Now, how many times has Solomon brought up the idea of a lazy man? Why do you suppose he does that? What's so important about discussing a lazy man with his son? Okay. Is there the potential for people in positions of power to just let everybody else work and them just enjoy the fruits of someone else's labor? And, the greatest leader is the one who gets out there and has their hands dirty and they're working and they're trying to lead. And he says here that the lazy man will not plow because of winter. Actually, the original word here is the word for the onset of winter, late autumn. It means a person that when the weather turns cold, he quits working. And the other day I saw one of these little pictures, and it showed how cold and snowy it was outside. You know what it said under it? "Farmers go to work today just like every other day." They have to go through that regardless whether the weather's good or the weather's bad. That's because they understand the importance of work. But here, the lazy man will not plow because of winter. He's not going to, it's become a little inconvenient. It's become a little bit challenging to do that. But what will happen to him? He'll beg during harvest and he'll have nothing. He's going to try to say, somebody else help me, help me, help me. You go back to chapter 6 and verses 6 through 9. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? Solomon is asking the question is, learn from nature if you need to. How ants provide for their time of winter. And what he's talking about here is once harvest is past, you can't grow anything then. And so you better make your preparations while you can. Okay, verse 5. Counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Now, this is one of the proverbs I think is very valuable. It's much like the one back in chapter 18 and verse 4. But he's talking about back in 18 verse 4, he said, the words of a man's mouth are like deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is like a flowing brook. When you think about water, it's that sustenance of life. Everybody has to have water to live. And 22 times in the book, he talks about counsel, which leads me to the idea, that's the sort of the key word here to me, is counsel. What is counsel? Advice from others. What kind of advice do you get from others? Well, on various things. Well, let's take a few verses here. Let's go to chapter 20 and verse 18. He said in chapter 20, verse 18, plans are established by counsel. By wise counsel wage war. Plans are established by wise counsel. Think about what you're doing and talk to others about it. If you're about to engage in something that you've never done before, would it be good to get advice from people who have done that? If you say, okay, I live in Warren County, I want to start growing a nursery. I'm going to till up my backyard and I'm going to plant a bunch of plants. Would it be wise to go to somebody who has done that for a while to ask, number one, how do you grow things? What should I grow? How many should I grow? What should I expect to pay for that? I mean, if you go to Brother Willie out here and you say, Willie, what should I be growing right now? You look at a person and you say, I need some advice. Counsel in the heart of a man is like deep water. Sometimes you have to go deeply to get it, but when you do, it's very refreshing to you. And he says, a man of understanding will draw it out. Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 6. For by wise counsel you will wage your own war, and in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Now, when you're trying to get advice, is it better to get more than one perspective? Because one man may have just been in the right place at the right time, or one man may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and his advice, though he gives it genuinely, may not be the perfect advice. So you get the advice from several. One more passage, chapter 12, or there's two more passages, chapter 12 and verse 15. The way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. Don't think that you already know it. There was a couple of gentlemen on the parking lot this week and went out and talked to them a little bit and invited them to services here. And we were talking about one of the fellows who was going to have to do some work on his vehicle. And he says, I love YouTube. He said, because YouTube, you can find out how to do anything. He said you can find out somebody else's mistakes, and then you can find out how to do it the right way. And I thought how true it is, because if they're talking about, for instance, how to replace a water pump on your car, and you put the kind of car you have, and you watch one guy and you see him and you see he's busted his knuckles 2 or 3 times, you know what I do? I just go ahead and stop. I go to somebody else who knows what they're doing, and you can tell pretty soon a person knows what they're doing. Well, that's what this man was trying to talk about out there. The multitude of counselors there is safety. And don't think that you already know. One other passage, chapter 11 and verse 14. He says, where there's no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. You don't listen, and you're very likely to fail. Very likely to fail. Okay, verse 6. Most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? What do you mean here? Each man will proclaim his own goodness. Okay. Okay, Tommy? Okay. If somebody's trying to tell you what they did and how they did it, do they generally tell you the mistakes they made, or do they generally leave those parts out and they tell you all the good things and leave out the bad things? Usually it's a good thing. But when you start thinking about what he is saying here, I think there's a lot in other passages which draw out the meaning here. Let me give you some of these, because these are some really valuable ones. In chapter 27 and verse 2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. Let somebody else praise you. I don't like having to write a resume. I hadn't written one in a long time. Most of the time, what is contained in a resume? A lot of boasting. I'm good at this. I'm good at that. I can do a good job here or do a good job there. But does anybody generally like to be around somebody who tells you how smart they are, how good they are, how talented they are, or how honest they are? There's just, well, somebody who toots their own horn, as Tommy was saying, most men will, and I think that's interesting, most men will proclaim their own goodness, each his own goodness. Most of us will try to picture ourselves in the best light. And I think of Luke chapter 18. You remember the 2 men who went to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector? How did the Pharisee pray with himself? Father, I thank you that I'm not like other men. And especially that old tax collector. I'm better than he is. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. In other words, look how good I am. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, and he talks about we're not bold to compare ourselves with certain of those who commend themselves, but they, comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. In other words, who do we generally want to compare ourselves to if we're talking about how smart we are? Yeah, well, some of us have to compare to the D students or the F students. But we want to compare ourselves with somebody who's below where we are. And most men will proclaim each his own goodness. But I title this is Talk is Cheap. It's not what just a person says, but what they actually do. Let me give you another passage I think is real good here. Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. On the day of judgment, will there be people who will be singing their own praises? Is it going to do any good? No. Let me offer one other passage here, and then I'll go on. In 1 John chapter 3, in verses 17 and 18. But whosoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? Let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Word and tongue. Is it easier to talk or do? Talk. And I think what Solomon is focusing on here is, how does a person act? He said, who can find a faithful man? He's talking about a man who's faithful in what he does and the way he lives, and contrast a person who just claims to be faithful. Yes. He's rare. Not the ones you're going to find every day. Okay, let's go to verse 7. The righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. Now, I think these proverbs are almost lined up as if you're reading one with the anticipation of the one that's going to follow. The righteous man walks in his integrity. What do you mean, walks in his integrity? The word walks is a synonym in the Bible for lives. You know, Romans chapter 7 and 8, walks in the flesh, walks by the Spirit. Walking in integrity is a man who, just like in verse 6 here, the faithful man. Here's the man who lives it every day of his life. He says that righteous man, that good man, his children are blessed after him. Now, let me provide some passages which I think could be helpful here. In chapter 19 and verse 14, he said, houses and riches are the inheritance from fathers. What kind of gifts can a parent leave their children? Houses and riches. They can leave them money, material things. But there's something else they can leave them. In chapter 22 and verse 1, he says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver or gold. How many of us were given and inherited the reputation of our parents? You know, you're coming along as a child, and the person over here may not know you, but they know your parents. Can that generate goodwill toward you, even though they've not seen you do anything? Yes. And so, as you think about what will you leave, I think about Abraham. It's really interesting. I didn't even put it in the lesson this morning because I knew I was going to use it in the class. In Genesis chapter 18 and verse 19, he said, for I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken of him or to him. Here's Abraham. He has not only left his children a possession, lands and houses. Not only has he left them a good name, but he's left them direction of how to live their lives. And when I think about parents, in my mind, I think about good parents who provided you not only the food you needed to have to eat, the clothes that were on your back, a place to live, but they also provided you with good guidance. Do you look back and appreciate your parents for what they instill within you? I hope so. Not everyone gets that, just like not everyone may be given lands and houses, but many of us were blessed very much with having good parents, and we ought to be thankful for that. His children are blessed after him. There's one other passage in this, I think is one I use a lot in funerals, and that's Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 7. He says there, the memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. I usually don't use the last part in the funerals, but the memory of the righteous is blessed. And if you can look back and look at your parents with good memories, precious memories, you ought to count your blessings. The fact that you've been given as much as you have been given.
They didn't say who you is, whose boy. I think his point was, people put a lot of stock in your parents and how you affect your parents' name and so forth.
That's definitely true. Definitely true. Okay, let's go to verse 8, and that'll probably be as far as we'll get for class today. A king who sits on the throne of judgment scatters all evil with his eyes. Now, one of the things as I'm going through and I'm trying to prepare for each one of these proverbs, I try to look and see, are there some terms that just keep repeating? And the term king is found 32 times in the book of Proverbs. Why do you suppose Solomon is focused so much on the topic of the king? His son, he anticipates, is going to take over. And what kind of a son will he be? You don't want to get to the book of Proverbs and he says, who's going to have control over what I've worked for in this life? Someone after I'm gone. And then it says, who knows whether he will be a fool or wise? And hopefully you're putting training in your children while you're alive so that when you get through with life, they'll know where to take over. But he's talking about here a king who sits on the throne of judgment. Now, you go all the way back to verse 1, and you think about, or verse 29 of chapter 19, and you think about the word judgment. We're talking about a person who evaluates a person's behavior and then metes out punishment for it. A king sits on the throne of judgment. That's his role. He's supposed to judge people and make sure he judges correctly and right. But he scatters all evil with his eyes. Can you look in somebody's eyes and generally tell whether you're making them mad or pleasing them? Sure. I can stand up before class or in the pulpit and I can see people either mad, they're glad, or they're sleeping. Y'all think I'm joking. I think people think that it's like it's a one-way mirror that you're seeing me, but I'm not seeing you. Sometimes I want to get tickled when I look out and, like catch them before they fall out in the pew, But when you look in someone's eyes, you can generally see what a person is thinking because of the way the expression they have. So he scatters all evil with his eyes. That's what he's trying to do, is to make evil, or should be trying to make evil, flee away. Let me give you a couple passages here that I think are helpful. In chapter 16, in verses 12 through 15, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the scripture reference for the next one, chapter 20 and verse 26. Chapter 16, verses 12 through 15, it is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right. As messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. In the light of the king's face is life, and his favor is like the cloud of the latter rain. When he's talking about there, you make the king mad, you know that you're putting your life at risk here. And then chapter 20 and verse 26, a wise king sifts out the wicked and brings the threshing wheel over them. He sifts out the wicked. He's out here and he's looking and he's trying to judge, is this man who stands before me or this woman who stands before me, are they telling the truth? Are they doing what is right? Or do they deserve judgment, or do they deserve punishment? And the king, the righteous king, is the one who's up here, and he's trying to look and make sure, I want to do what is right and righteous and just and fair in God's sight. Have any questions or comments? That's obvious he doesn't. Yeah, he only wants good. Lord willing, next week we'll pick up with verse 9.